Hello and thanks for joining us on Insights. My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you so much for joining us.
We're counting down to the November 11 of SACCO elections in the three states of Bayelsa, Imo and Kogi, gauging the general preparations for the polls, as well as feeling the temperature of the contending parties and the electorate. In the last episode of our program, Imo State was in focus, and so this episode would review events in Bayelsa and Kogi as political activities in these states build towards a crescendo. And you, Elizabeth?
Yeah, you know, ending impunity for crimes against journalists is a serious issue in the journalism profession. So we will be analyzing the UN Action Plan to protect, prevent, and prosecute offenders. We will also take a little tilt into reporting, gender-based violence reporting in the course of the program.
Very well then, let's get started. I'm fascinated with the discourse on national monuments and assets and how much is being done to preserve and
look into the language issue. We have turned English to become like a pride value in our own cultural values.
It's not cash transfer. It's not a COVID-19.
Invasion 1897 was a deliberate tactic.
You know, many of these people coming to the urban areas now.
These and applications, there are terms and conditions that.
Of course, it is the union of two people, a man and a woman coming together.
My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori.
Now, well, what do people generally want out of elections? To answer my own question, I'll say they want fairness, they want credibility. Let's narrow it down to the November 11 of SACCO governorship elections in the three states of Bayelsa, Imo and Kogi. And I'll tell you something. I mean, the electorate wants a string of activities that would promote accountability on the part of the electoral management body, which is INEC. And they also want actions that can assist in enhancing the acceptability of election outcomes, whether by political participants and, of course, the public in general. The question still arises, though, as to if that is already in play. I mean, let's pick up the pace and have my guests join me in the conversation as we focus on events in Kogi State. I have my guest from Lokoja in Kogi State, Hamza Liu. He is the Executive Director, Initiative for Grassroots Advancement in Nigeria, INGRA, a group operating out of Lokoja, there in Kogi State. Hamza, glad to have you join us on Insight. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Great. I'd like to begin with a poser, and it revolves around the assumption that SACCO's subnational elections should be better governed and more peaceful than general elections. As a process, you and I know that elections is not just the day of the votes. It begins from before then and, you know, culminates in the post-election period as well. Within that context, let's look at events in Kogi State, particularly with regards to election-related violence. And tell me if you think we did enough to nip all of that in the bud, or, you know, and if we were to use that as a parameter to judge or to gauge what is likely to happen in elections day, what is your expectation generally as regards security in Kogi State for the elections?
Well, like you said, if we look at the trend analysis of the elections that had happened before this, you will say that that premise would be correct, that standing elections, off-cycle elections are always very calm, very well prepared, and INEC seem to be better prepared when it comes to off-cycle elections. And so that trend analysis will tell us that, yes, we anticipate that the elections in Kogi will be better implemented, and there will be more security in terms of availability of security agencies. But if you look at Kogi, for instance, Kogi on its own, standing alone, Kogi has always been a hotbed for violence, and it doesn't play to that same trend that we just mentioned. Since 1999, we've had several cycles of elections in Kogi, and it seemed to play out the same script in terms of how agitated and how animated the competitors are in the Kogi elections. seems to take a life of its own other than what you have in other states. Of course, for instance, before the general election, we had Ekiti, Oshu, we had Anambra elections. Fairly, if you look at the trend, they look fairly easy and fairly well secured, well managed. But if you come to Kogi election, 2019 standalone Kogi election, and the one before it, 2015, showed clearly that Kogi has a problem with issue around violence during elections. And so we tend to have this fear when it comes to elections in Kogi that the trend will continue for us. The trend doesn't really necessarily mean what's happening in other states. What happens in Kogi state always have to be very, very clearly want to look into. So we are apprehensive when it comes to elections, and we know that if things are not done differently, we're going to get the same result that we get the last time.
It's already looking like a fierce battle. I mean, let's look at the list, and I mean in terms of the elections proper now, let's look at the list of contenders. APC's Ododo, Ahmed Usman, Senator Dino Melaye of PDP, there's Murtala Yakubu Ajaka of the Social Democratic Party. Let's not forget Leke Abejide of the African Democratic Congress. And you cannot also write off people like Olayinka Bretmont of Action Alliance and our friend, the Labour Party candidate Okeme Adejo, I mean, they're in Labour. I mean, there are 18 of them I know, but these ones apparently stand out, and we don't know where the pendulum would swing. I mean, it could easily swing anywhere. Give me your thoughts on where these candidates stand on policies and how, you know, some of the development issues that they've raised are resonating with the electorate there in Kogi State.
Well, when I talked about violence and about the APC, I wasn't saying that the political parties are beginning to attacking themselves. No, I'm saying that the rhetoric is within one political party, within candidates of one political party, and that's what we are scared of. To your question around what are the political party candidates talking about? What issues are they raising? What's the difference between the APC, the PDP, the ADC, and the rest? To be quite frank, and I like that you asked the question previously, what do they bring to the table? All we were asking for before this political campaign began was, can we for once in our political history make the campaigns issue-based? Can we begin to look at how do we make Kogi better? Kogi has a lot of potentials, looking at both the geography and in terms of its history. A lot of potential for the state to be great. Can we for once begin to talk about how do we get this greatness out of the state? And unfortunately for us, other primordial issues took over the campaigns. Instead of people telling us, this is what we want to do for the state, this is how we're going to do it. All political parties and their candidates are talking about the same thing. It is our turn. All you hear is, this time around, it is for the central, it is for the east, it is for the west. I'm a man, I'm a woman. All those kind of issues that do not bring value to the democratic system that we run are what we are now going back to again. And this is the pains that citizens in Kogi State are feeling. Why is it that continuously, circle after circle, we have the same conversation, and that conversation doesn't add any value to our democracy? What value does where you come from add to what you do as a leader? How does that change the food on the table for the citizens of Kogi State if you come from the east or you come from the west? It doesn't make a difference. And so we are hoping, and we kept probing and pushing the political parties to, please, why don't you talk about issue-based campaigns? Tell your people, tell your candidates that this is what the guys are looking for. But unfortunately for us, and that's what I was meaning when I said violence, instead of political parties in their internal democracies to sit down within themselves and talk about what the issue should be, all we are hearing is, it is our turn. That political party is not the party that should produce the candidate.
Perhaps would use this opportunity to set agenda for these political parties and see where they, I mean, even though they've not predominantly or substantially dwelt on these issues, but what issues do you think would resonate with the people there, with the electorate there in Kogi State? Of course, Kogi is a state that was established in 1991. I mean, it's been around for a bit, and it has a fairly large challenge of development. I mean, what issues do you think at this point will resonate with the electorate? What do you think they want to hear? Your audio is muted. If you don't mind unmuting your audio there.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go right ahead.
Okay, so the question you asked is a beautiful question that we expected the political parties to be asking the people. What is it that you want us to do for you? For instance, Kogi is Lokoja, for instance, is at the confluence of Nigerian and Benue. And so the issue of water should not be our problem. But we have a very big issue of water. And so the infrastructure of Kogi State is at best minimal, and we need to fast track the development of our infrastructure. So you'll be asking about roads, you'll be asking about water, about health systems, we'll be asking about issues around power. We have the Guber power plant, and yet there's no power in Kogi State to power industries. And so these are some of the things that we're expecting for us to be discussing. Lokoja, for instance, and Kogi State, for instance, we are at the crossroad. We are bordered by 9 other states, so we're a transit state. A lot of commerce happens within Lokoja, and we expect that having good roads will increase the capacity of the state to be able to grow its GDP in terms of commerce. But we're not having good roads. This election is a referendum for the Yahya administration, and we're hoping that they will use this opportunity to say, this is what we have done, this is how far we have come, and this is where we think we should go in the next 5-10 years. The other political parties should tell us what this other party has done. They have not done up to what we expect to do, and this is what we're going to do. But unfortunate for us, the rhetoric that we hear is about, it is our turn, it is our turn. And it is crowding out this issue around what should be the issue-based defining moments for these campaigns. And unfortunate for us, campaigns will end on the 9th.
Yes.
And if we don't go back to these issue-based things, we are going to lose out again the next 4 years to say, whoever wins would have told us what they wanted to do for us. And we'll end up having a 4 years where the person who wins will not have anything to hold him accountable, or she hold them accountable by. And that is the unfortunate thing for guys right now in this election. We are hoping that within now and night something will happen.
Quite unfortunate, Hamza. You referenced something about the power balance or the tussle for power sharing among the different zones. We will come to that before we end our conversation. But I'd like you to comment on something, but then I'll play you an excerpt from a report filed by one of our correspondents there in Kogi State. The report essentially talks about the issue of accessibility to far-flung communities during electioneering campaigns. Let's watch that report now.
Iluke Akutupa Abuja Road is a death trap. A path not meant for the faint-hearted. Even the strongest of cars bleed on the road. And it takes some driving dexterity to climb the much-dreaded Okegiru Hill. There are several harrowing stories of deaths on the road, and they are not tales by moonlight. During the last general elections, INEC officials and journalists, including me, waited till the dead of the night before the returning officers from those areas came with their results. They were like men from war zones, with some vowing never to return to those areas for electoral duties because of the risk on the roads.
Anyone is telling me that this is how the place looks like, I won't believe it.
As far as Bono district is concerned, the bulk of election normally come from these axis. This is Kri axis of Bono district.
In this excerpt, I liked the key issue of accessibility, which definitely impacts elections in several ways. There are a couple of communities like the ones you've done, like the one you've just seen in that video in Kogi State, and I mean it would be critical to consider how to change, past narratives of delayed arrival of voting materials and even results. In your experience, Hamza, what would you consider the best approach in ensuring that communities far-flung and perhaps in the hinterlands enjoy special attention and get the opportunity to actively participate in the November 11 vote and also in good time?
Before I answer that question, recall we talked about the emergency need for Kogi to get infrastructure development. That is a typical example for you. For the first, you see the road is bad, but you only get to know that the road is bad during elections, when you see politicians find their way to that place, or you see INEC staff or INEC is finding its way to that place. That is only the time you get to hear that the roads are bad. That road actually you're seeing is an alternative road to what the road that leads to my place in Kogi State, the Kakanda Kupa Egon area. There's no access road between Lokoja and that place. So Lokoja local government has a boundary with Kababuni local government at that back end. And that is why you're seeing that particular issue coming up. Now, to your question on how can those far-flung areas, how do they get access to electoral materials and start election and be part of the elections, so that at the end of the day, their results mean something when it comes to coalition? We have engaged INEC on that. Civil society has engaged INEC on that to say, what do we do? These are not the only far-flung areas. There are other ones around Kogi State. One of those things that INEC has said is that they are going to establish new racks, new registration area centers closer to those areas, so that materials get to those areas. But of course, like your report said, some of those ad hoc staff are saying they will not go back there, looking at the nature of those places. They have said they won't go back there because that place is almost like a death trap. If anything happens to you, coming out from that place becomes a problem. And so the question will be, if no matter what INEC does, is the individuals, the human beings that will get there, that will make the process work. Now, if the human beings find it difficult to get there and you cannot guarantee their safety, then how do you think that those people in those places that live there will be able to contribute to state development? And this is what we're telling the political parties and their candidates. Why don't you look at those places? What do you want to do for those places? How do you want to do it? Kogi State doesn't have resources like Nigeria. We are bleeding resources. How do you curb corruption? How do you make governance cheaper? How do you get elected representatives to interface with their people? There are people who represent those people in the State House of Assembly. When they voted for the general election, people were voted from those areas. So what have they been able to do? Kogi State has a budget. What has been done about that budget? These are some of the discussion, the narrative, the conversations that we're trying to hold the political parties to have those conversations. But instead, what you hear is those other primordial issues. And so we bleed when we hear things like this. Kogi State is not supposed to be in this kind of situation. And we're hoping that between now and the 9th of November, some of these political parties will get their acts together and begin to have this discussion with the electorate to say, this is what we're going to do for you. But as we stand now, they say the Friday that will be good, you notice it from the Wednesday. It's not looking good for us in Kogi State. And we're hoping that political parties get their act together.
Okay, now let's talk specifically about treatment of complaints. I mean, especially with, or for instance, with the transmission of results by INEC for this election. Well, we know that going by the Supreme Court's verdict, it is now clear that INEC alone has the discretion to determine how results will be transmitted. In your opinion, has INEC done enough? I mean, between February 25 presidential elections, where we had the glitch, and now, to reassure Nigerians, and especially the electorate in the 3 states that will be participating in the off-cycle elections, sufficiently enough, not to raise doubts, serious doubts, about the validity of election outcomes, I mean, going forward, and even reduce election-related litigations in the upcoming November 11 elections?
Well, Nnamdi, that particular question forms the basis of most of the anger of Nigerians around the general election of 2023. That issue around transmission of results. Remember, when we began this program earlier, we talked about the trend analysis for standalone elections. Yes. We said that standalone elections, INEC performed creditably well in terms of how it handled the elections. And so the use of the IRF in terms of transmission of results was almost like a game changer for us. So we were very happy. In Ekiti it worked, in Osun it worked, in Anambra it worked, in Edo it worked. So all these standalone elections, it worked. The question would be, how come it didn't work in the general elections of 2023? And why was that lack of it working become a fulcrum for the issues that arose from those elections? For INEC, it's unfortunate that whatever happened in the general elections that made that particular presidential result transmission not work the way it should work. It's unfortunate, and INEC will have to live with that albatross on their head. They have to carry that cross on their head. Civil society will sympathize with INEC. We don't want to be INEC shoes, but I don't think citizens are happy enough with what INEC is doing to address that issue. There's still a lot of let me say bad blood between electorate and INEC, and they feel that INEC deliberately did what it did in the general elections. how INEC is going to address that issue will be determined by how they improve on the next round of elections. Kogi is one of the, Kogi, Bayelsa, and Imo are the first elections after the general elections. Let's see if INEC will have issue in that IREF issue. Because if it is now that we're going to know if there was a glitch in that general election or there was no glitch. If this works, which means maybe they were right, there was a glitch. But again, when somebody doesn't believe you, they don't believe you. There's nothing you can do about it. Some persons have chosen not to believe INEC on that particular issue. So it's something that we hope that INEC can get over as we move on.
Okay, so earlier on, you referenced the power sharing, or rather the tussle for power in Kogi State. I said we were going to talk about that, and maybe we'll use that to round off our conversation. You know, there's this struggle for balance of power between the Galas, the Ibiras, and then, of course, the Yoruba-speaking part. You know, they call them the Okuns. Okuns, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, this Okun, they call them the Okun. These are people in the Kogi Works axis. They seem to have been completely out of the power sharing equation since 1991, though it would seem, you know, morally justifiable for power to rotate to Kogi West. Do you prospect, or do you think there's a chance for a change in the tide? Or do you see the tide of who has the largest number, or perhaps, as we say in democracy, that who are majority would have their way, even when minority have their say? I mean, do you see that again playing out in Kogi politics?
Well, it's a question. It's a funny question, but it's a existential question for the state, because that tussle for inclusion in governance, like in the general elections and in Nigeria, is actually trying to determine how Kogi moves forward. Like you said, there's a lot of agreements in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of Kogi State. The Galas, who numerically have the largest number, seem to have been in power longer than every other person, because, of course, like you said, democracy is a game of numbers.
Yes.
But because the Electoral Act does not give you permission, it doesn't allow you to win elections without having the spread in the state, just like at national level. You must have that spread. And it means that you must also push your hand, you must extend your hand across these ethnic divides for you to be able to become governor. And so it's going to be very difficult for any one tribe to hold on to power in Kogi State. There must be that handshake across divides. But the problem now is the present governor, who is an Ibria, has done his 8 years. And so the expectation was that there should be a power shift to another zone, either the Okuns or the Igalas. Now, the Igalas have been in power since 1991. The three former governors have been from the Igala extraction. And so the moral question would have been, what about the Okuns? Numerically, they don't have the numbers in terms to really take the power by themselves. So there was this moral agitation to say, can we get it to our side, so that at least we have a sense of belonging. But now you have the two dominant ethnic groups, the Igrias and the Igalas, struggling over who should become the governor. And that's the funny thing about it. That's why I say it's a funny question. They should have been, that question should not even have come up in the first place. If we had good governance and the citizens had good infrastructure, they would see evidence of democracy. I don't think anybody will bother from where you come from. I doubt it. But because there is this problem, everybody is saying, if our people were there, maybe we'll get a better deal in terms of development. And if our people are not there, maybe that is the reason why we don't have the better deal. And so that primordial sentiment is still playing out, and it is going to cause us to move backward in terms of our progress in the state development that we're looking for. We need to move from this conversation to get to a conversation where it doesn't matter where you come from. That kind of discussion should not come up in our state development. But unfortunately, we have that discussion, and it is what is driving this election.
And I do agree with you there completely, Amza. I mean, the conversation has to move beyond the primordial conversation of where this one is from, where this fellow is from, and move to other development issues, and then we should gauge, leadership should be gauged on integrity, competence, and the ability to deliver on service. I mean, that should be the conversation we should be having. That should be where our focus, I mean, should be ordinarily. I'd like to thank you so much, Hamza Aliu, Executive Director, Initiative for Grassroots Advancements in Nigeria, operating, of course, out of Lokoja in Kogi State. I would like to appreciate you for your rather profound thoughts on some of the issues that we've raised. And, of course, we would be joining you during the elections from here in Abuja, and you'll be over there in Kogi State, and we'll see how, you know, how things go on the D-Day on come November 11. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much for having me.
Moving on, let's cross over now to Bayelsa State, where Tare Maureen Amanama, an election observer, joins us from Yenagoa, capital of Bayelsa State, to review events as they concern the upcoming governorship elections there. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us on Insight.
Thank you for having me.
Earlier on, I had a guest, someone from the civil society, you know, operating out of Lokoja, Kogi State on the program, and we talked about a couple of issues. Security was one of the issues that we talked about. I know that the security situation is actually no better there in Bayelsa State. In fact, it is a fact that since the start of campaigns in June 14, if I'm not mistaken, the atmosphere has largely remained politically charged, characterized by inciting and fierce rhetorics, threats of violence, and in some cases, many cases, actual incidents of violence among key political actors. Some say the inability of security forces to prosecute culprits over the reoccurring electoral violence in the state may hold serious consequences for the actual vote on November 11. Do you think pre-election violence greatly threatens the success of the Guber polls there in Bayelsa?
I think judging from instance from past elections in Bayelsa State, we want to say that we've seen where threats have been made, and that kind of like played out on election day, that people didn't come out to vote in a particular local government area in Bayelsa State. So it's a serious concern, and we know the security said they are at the top of their game. They are doing their bit to see, but the constant, the fact that perpetrators have not been arrested and be put out and set as an example is also something that is also triggering the fact that people would feel it's something they can do and get away with. So we will want to be seeing a situation whereby people that perpetrate violence on election day are arrested. They are set as an example, so people can see that actually if we commit this crime, when we get caught, we will be prosecuted.
Well, people who commit election-related violence, even during campaigns, should also be arrested as an example to others as well. You know, yes. Incidentally, there in Bayelsa, the incumbent is vying to return to office for a second term, but of course, he needs to overcome a former governor, and then there are also others who are equally qualified to be governor, also vying for that same slot. Have we seen issues-based campaigns since the start of campaigns by June 14? And what do you consider the major strength of the contending candidates? At least let's take the three major ones there in Bayelsa State. Perhaps we'll also talk about some of what you think are maybe their weaknesses. And do you think their professional and political antecedent, do you think that could also be part of their strength? Maybe let's begin with the governor, the sitting governor, the incumbent, and then we'll go to the APC and then Labour Party.
Okay, so for the sitting governor, who has been the House of Rep member, he has also been a senator of the Federal Republic, and he is the current governor and vying for a second term. So one will say this is someone that has all the experience in governance. He was also a former commissioner for sports. So one will say this is someone that has all the right requirements. He has all the administrative requirements and all the pedigree to be returned to office. So for the APC candidate, I think it's same thing because he has also been a former governor of the state. He's just the immediate past petroleum minister of the federation, and so it is both of them. For both of them, I feel they have the experience. They know what the people want. So, but and then the candidate of the Labour Party, which is also a young man, he has been a front runner of he has been the president of the Ijaw Youth Council. He was also a former commissioner in the state, and I think just recently he was part of the board of NDDC. So one will also say he has also some sort of administrative experience. But for the two contenders from the APC and the PDP, who we will all say have been governors and is currently governor, and I would say they have more experience in terms of that. But I would have loved to see that their campaigns are more issue-based, because it is more of, you have been there, you didn't do A, you didn't do B, and you are there, you're not doing A, you're not doing B. It is not, their campaigns have not been focusing on the needs of the common man. It has been, what are you looking for? Don't come back to the seats and all that. So it has not centered on the issues, how the developments will take and will be for the common man to benefit. Developments that will not get to the nooks and crannies, and that's how their campaign have basically be on. Although when they get to some other platforms, they tend to tell people this is what they want to do and this is what they want to do. But for those two candidates, I feel they've had the experience. They've been in governance, they've been in the space, and that has I think it's an edge for the both of them.
We're talking about the issue of accessibility to far-flung areas, and I was going to say that I know that Bayelsa State has a similar challenge like Kogi State, if not bigger, of accessibility to far-flung riverine communities. We have an excerpt from a story filed by one of our correspondents based in Yonagwa. I would like to play that report for you to watch, and then we'll take up the conversation from there.
Bayelsa State, which is below sea level and standing on the river known stretching the river Focados and that of the Arashi axis, has a peculiar terrain, as majority of its people reside in the remote areas. Consequently, the prediction by NIMET on possible flood is a source of worry to eligible voters to exercise their civic responsibility come November 11. Stakeholders who are worried by the developments considering the terrain call on INEC to put measures in place to ensure that materials and other logistics are put in place ahead of the governorship election.
And the possibility of transporting these materials to Ezetu, Foropa, Okube, and Igma Galabri, those riverine areas and all that, is a problem.
People must move from one point to the other. For instance, a lot of people live in Yenegua, but their voting points are in their rural areas, in their communities. I, for one, am registered in my community, OD. I must go to cast my...
They appeal to security agencies to beef up security in the waterways to enable people travel to their polling units to cast their ballots.
Because of the topography, I want the INEC and other security officials to know that we are a special state.
Election is fast approaching, and in our waterways, we need security for voters to comfortably sit on the speedboat to go and cast their vote.
Despite fears, the Independent National Electoral Commission says all arrangements will be considered to ensure a smooth and credible election.
Also give them confidence that it will be well. And where Bayelsa at the moment is particularly very peaceful, and we pray that it will continue to be so.
So we can see from that report that there are concerns. There are definitely concerns, and these concerns have remained substantially, even though INEC has reassured the electorate and voters there in Bayelsa State that arrangements will be made. But then these arrangements, the success or failure of these arrangements would largely impact on the election. I would like to ask your take or your opinion on all of this, and what kind of special attention or focus you think should be given to far-flung areas and communities like these, so that election materials arrive in time, so that the people can actively participate in the vote, and also so that results can begin to return from some of these communities and get to the state collation centers also in time?
Yes, it is no news that Bayelsa is 70% riverine and it's covered by water. And we have one of the largest local governments in Nigeria, in Bayelsa, which is Southern Ijo, and which is basically 90% riverine. And also some parts of the Keremo, Brass, you have to go through waters. And that has been the issue of logistics, materials getting to those polling units in those various areas on time has been issues that we as civil society organizations, we've taken to INEC to see how they can manage situations like that on the election day. And in terms of also security, because when materials don't get to places on time, and sometimes in polling units like that, security personnel are not seen in most of those polling units and those had to reach communities. So, but I think INEC has continually assured us that they will be working with the military to see how they can airlift some of those materials to those ads to reach areas. And I know that INEC is also working with the Maritime Union here in Bayelsa State to see how they can add to the boats that they have to also so they can be able to carry materials and officials to those hard to reach areas. And basically, I would want every citizen, eligible voters of Bayelsa State to be patient with the umpire and let us hope on what they have promised, because with them, there has been a series of stakeholders meetings with security personnel, with civil society organizations, with every stakeholder that is involved in the process. So I want us to continually trust and see that every stakeholder is involved, the security, the INEC, will do what they had promised to do for us on November 11. So I think the basic issue here is materials getting to those places on time. And if INEC is working with the military to see how they can airlift some of those materials to those areas, that is a welcome development.
Indeed, that will be a welcome development indeed.
Yeah.
In wrapping up our conversation, let's talk about the power sharing arrangements in Bayelsa State. I know there is such an arrangement at the senatorial level, depending on the zone. For Bayelsa West, for instance, the sharing arrangement is between Sagbama and the Ekeremo. I don't have a full grasp of what happens, or what happens between Braz, Yenagoa, and Sagbama. But if I were to recall the struggle against political dominance or domination and the agitation for a distinct state comprising the Old Brass, the Gema, and the Western Ijaw divisions, I wonder if the Ijaw nation still continues to agitate within itself for equitable distribution of political offices, and why that continues to subsist.
The issue of power tussle in Bayelsa State and some of our senatorial districts it has been an interesting one. And sometimes this sharing formula emulates from political parties. Political parties sit down and call stakeholders involved, and they come up with a sharing formula which they feel is nice. Not just Bayelsa West that has a sharing formula. For Bayelsa East Senatorial District, I don't think we've ever had a senator that has gone in for a second tenure in that senatorial district. It's always because they have 3 local governments in that senatorial district. So when one local government produce a senator for this term, the next term it's moving to the next senatorial district. And sometimes I feel it's not helping the state in terms of representation. And because most of the times when you see returning senators coming back into the Senate, that's when they are giving some kind of viable committee to chair. They don't usually give to newcomers. So, but for the governorship position in the state, the Central has had its share, Bayelsa East has had its share, Bayelsa West just wrapped up 8 years in its share. And some say, to some persons, they said it's the turn of the Central. And the candidate for PDP is from the Central. And for some, they say it's also fair for Bayelsa East to also produce, because the candidate from the APC was there for 5 years, which is, let's say he did one term, and he's due a second tenure. And it's also the candidate for Labour Party, who is also from Central, feels it's also a good share for him to also have. So in Bayelsa, we have the power to support for now, because every senatorial district has had its turn in producing a governor, so it can go any way, because Bayelsa East has also produced before, Bayelsa Central has produced, Bayelsa West has produced, so it can go both ways. And Bayelsa West, which just wrapped up 8 tenure with the former governor, so it's more or less.
I can agree that. I can agree that any arrangement that ensures a rotation of power, or that ensures some sort of power balance, is morally right, or morally
and accepted.
Yes, morally accepted and politically right. Accepted. But then at the end of the day, politics and democracy and elections is a game of numbers, and then we'll see what the numbers say come November 11. Tare Maureen Amanama, I would like to thank you so much. Amanama. Thank you.
Amanana. Thank you.
That's a mouthful. I would, I'm sure I'll get the spelling correct. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on our program. It's been delightful having you come on our program on Insight to discuss this issue. Thank you so much indeed. Time now for Elizabeth Omori. Elizabeth Omori is up next.
Ending impunity for crimes against journalists is one of the most complex challenges of recent times. The 2023 observance seeks to raise awareness on challenges faced by journalists and communicators in the exercise of their profession, also to warn of the increasing violence and repression against them. How do we put an end to this as we strive to ensure freedom of the press always? My guest, Ladi Bala, President, Nigeria Association of Women Journalists, will speak to us. Madam Ladi, thank you so much for joining us on Insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Now, why is ending impunity against journalists a difficult task?
Thank you very much for this question, and I'm happy that we are dwelling on this issue. Ending impunity for crime committed against journalists has become a very difficult task because of lack of cohesion among stakeholders, and particularly government and security operatives. Because journalists are constantly harassed. Putting an end to impunity for crime committed against journalists has become very, very important, because the society needs to understand the role of journalists and the media particularly. The media is here and journalists are equally here to help build a better society. And like I always say, the journalists, journalists and the media constitute the pillar, one of the strongest pillars of democracy. So if we must have a democracy that is what it's sought, where the society feels safe and enjoy the dividend of democracy, the media must be allowed to function, in a free society. But the Nigerian media is not really free per se. You see journalists being unlawfully arrested, abused, malhandled, beaten, abused, and all that. And this is not really healthy for our democracy, because when the journalist is caged, when the media can no longer carry out their function effectively for fear of being, you know, kind of censored. It puts the society on a very terrible state, and because the journalists will now, you know, hold back. And once information are not being given out, the right informations are not being given out, the society will not have the information that they need to make informed decisions and choices. So it is very, very disturbing that Nigeria still rank poorly in the global indices of press freedom. It is a big challenge to our democracy, and I believe that the time has come for all stakeholders to understand the role that the media and journalists play in advancing, you know, development in the society, and begin to give us, to provide that level playing ground for the media to flourish.
You know, the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity address the fundamental aspects of prevention, protection, and prosecution. How can we adopt this action plan on safety for Nigerian journalists?
It's very important that we do that. For instance, we are going for an off-cycle governorship election in 3 states in Nigeria. It has behoved on all journalists covering elections to protect themselves first, because it is important. Self-protection first. They should adhere strictly to the ethics of the profession in covering the electoral process, the elections in those states. And government, particularly the current administration, must adhere to international and regional frameworks, you know, that speaks to the issue of the 3 Ps as recommended by UNESCO: prevention, protection, and prosecution. Government should be accountable for the safety of journalists and the media, because the media must be allowed to breathe. The media must be allowed to carry out, to ply their trade in a way that advances the cause of development. And therefore, it is imperative that we adopt this recommendation by UNESCO. That is the only way to go. And I remember some few years back, there was this campaign, you know, that was spearheaded by groups in the media cycle, that we need to have a national, for the establishment of a national mechanism for the safety of journalists. When we have such kind of establishment, you know, put in place, it will address, you are sure of, if there is any violation or abuse on a journalist, we are sure of a body that will really look into it. And I think that is one area that the current administration need to look into, because the journalists, the media is very critical in the development of this of Nigeria, and hence the need for them to be given, you know, the space to operate freely without being intimidated, without being harassed, without being subjected to unholy kind of maltreatment.
Okay, now another aspect of journalism I want you to speak to is still a recurring decimal: shielding of perpetrators of gender-based violence and shaming the victims. Let's deal a little on this.
Thank you very much. This is one area that really the media is making effort to address. Sexual and gender-based violence is on the increase in our society, and it is a very bad phenomenon that is going on. But for us as journalists, particularly NAWOJ, we have over time, you know, tried to provide training to journalists on how to report sexual and gender-based violence. And in reporting sexual and gender-based violence, the emphasis should be on the interest of the survivor. That's what we recommend. Like, it should be on the interest on the survivor, the survivor's dignity, the survivor's rights to life. Those are the rights of the survivor must be protected, and the identity of the survivor must not be put out there for people to, you know, to know who the survivor is. But we say the perpetrator should be named and shamed. That will serve as a deterrent to a would-be perpetrator of sexual and gender-based violence, because it is on the increase. And for us journalists, when we are reporting that, we say when you are reporting sexual and gender-based violence, we have to be sensitive with the kind of, pay attention to the kind of language that we use, in reporting sexual and gender-based violence. For instance, one has to take into consideration the culture. One has to be, as a reporter, you must take into consideration the culture of the survivor, the environment where such issue is being reported. You must not be insensitive to the values and the norms of the people, when asking questions, asking the survivor question and all that, and then the judgmental aspect, the use of judgmental language, when reporting sexual and gender-based violence must be avoided at all costs, because the survivor needs to be shielded. You need to shield the survivor, the identity of the survivor, the name of the survivor, the place, the family of the survivor must be excluded in the details of your story. The emphasis most of the time should be on protecting the survivor, but exposing the perpetrator. Also seek the consent of the survivor in taking pictures and videos of the survivor. For instance, for children, for little children, completely their pictures and video must not be put out there, because when you do that, you further expose the survivor to more danger, to risks of attack or further attack, because the perpetrators are out there and they don't want to be known and they don't want to be exposed. Exposing them alone make them to arm you. It's like you are equally arming them. To go back and attack when you expose the identity of the survivor. So the interest basically must be in protecting the interest, the dignity, the self-worth of the survivor, and exposing that of the perpetrator. So that's the way to report sexual and gender-based violence, and it is very important that we dwell on that, because it is on the increase, and media, particularly journalists, are the ones that will continue to raise awareness on this issue. And because when we report sexual and gender-based violence often, and we stay on that and ensure that persecution, are concluded, and the survivor gets justice, it will help, in telling the members of the society that these issues are no longer being tolerated by members of the society.
Yes. And
family members too need to also understand the need to cooperate, in reporting any kind of abuse or violation of any kind, to either a woman or a man, boy or girl. Because when we talk about sexual and gender-based other forms of violence, we are not just restricted to women. Even boys and men suffer some level of violence. They experience sexual harassment as well. So when we talk about promoting the fights against sexual and gender-based violence, we are addressing a whole lot of issues.
So it means the writing style has to change.
Definitely, it has to change.
And the delivery, so that victims can get justice.
Exactly.
Okay, on a final note, I want you to talk from the point of an advocate, because you are the president of the Nigerian Association of Women Journalists. Are there tips you can provide to put an end to gender-based violence? Can we end this?
Yes, we can, if we are all willing and determined to do that.
Okay.
And it has to start with advocacy. Advocacy is very key. Advocacy on critical stakeholders like the law enforcement agencies and the police particularly. And I'm glad to note, to say that today we have gender decks, officers and gender decks have been created in all the security agencies. More needs to be done, more advocacy needs to be done on the complexity of pursuing, addressing the case of sexual and gender-based violence. Because most of the time the officers appointed, or designated to handle such issues, after a while you see that they transfer them and then new officers are brought to handle on the gender decks. And because they don't stay for too long, and after training, they leave, another set of people come. So understanding the issues properly and giving it the right kind of commitment has become a very big problem. So I think more advocacy and more create more awareness and sensitization, to members of the public to understand the inherent danger and the consequences of sexual and gender-based violence, because it has a way of affecting the survival. As advocates, we have to, put in the front burner to ensure that every stakeholder is mobilized to understand these issues and then provide the required cooperation and support at all levels.
Ladibala, National President, Nigeria Association of Women Journalists, we want to thank you so much for promoting the cause of our profession and speaking out against ills negating true values. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And that's it on this episode of the program. To join us same time next week for more on Insights. My name is Nnamdi Adipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.